took something, retitled it something different, changed it from a private institution to a public institution and told America it doesn't exist. But it does. And that's what's leading to mass incarceration today. And the 800% increase in the prison population. That's why we have 16 times more prisoners than closest to industrialization. That's why we have 5% of the world's human population, but 26% of the world's prison population, is because these states realize they can make tens of billions of dollars off the forced involuntary servitude of the weakest, most vulnerable in society. And that's, once again, not right.
So, Tanawah Downing, you're a civil rights attorney, is that right?
I'm an advocate. So there's a difference between an advocate and an attorney. An attorney goes through what's known as adjudicative law. They learn about the adjudication process, the process to make a person into a criminal. So they learn about all the laws that remove freedom. They learn about ordinances, statutes, customs, and judge-made rulings. They learn all those because they're in the business of making a person into a criminal, therefore removing freedom. I'm an advocate. All that I studied was substantive law. They deal with the administration process. I deal with law enforcement. So I'm the first half. I build cases and then bring them into a judicial proceeding. So I'm the first half with substantive law.
What got you into that?
Well, I always wanted to be in federal law enforcement. That was always my plan. And I guess that when I finished my first master's, which is master's in forensics, I had to bill it to the FBI or the DEA. And I had planned on going into the DEA, and I just decided to go a different way. And so I went into corporate security stuff, where I actually changed some of my minor within the forensics program into like forensic video analysis and forensic accounting. So they were more corporate based, and as a result, then I just went that direction. And I spent probably 14 years doing that. I built a big company, an engineering firm. We were 13th fastest growing company in Washington State in 2015. The following year, we were 22nd national emergency small business. I was one of the top experts in national security technology design. But one day I just kind of woke up, and it was during a divorce, horrible, just brutal divorce that I didn't want. And I came to realize fairly quickly that national security is simply code word for domestic terrorism. And the things that I was doing in my ignorance, not understanding that we don't protect the government from the people, we protect people from the government, that the things that I had been doing was wrong, and I need to do something about it. And so back in about 9 years ago, I completely switched. I got rid of the company, and I decided to go into litigation full time. This is my first love. I mean, law enforcement is what I always loved. And I see myself now back in federal law enforcement, as funny as that is, because that's what I'm doing. I'm standing up for the laws of the United States, particularly what makes America, America, the Constitution of the United States of America.
Hell yeah, man. That's very admirable. So you've got a big ass case that you've been working on. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I got to be honest with you. I didn't prepare a whole lot for this podcast because it's not that I lack the understanding. I lack the legal knowledge and the constitutional knowledge, if you will, to even argue these things. And I really care about them. I really care about civil rights, and I really want to hear what you got going on.
Yeah. And honestly, it's sometimes better that you don't know, because one of the things I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to make sure that the people that don't understand my message get some clarity on it. So these people that would be coming in to watch this that don't have any knowledge as well, the questions that you would have would be the same questions that they would have. So so it is actually good. But so the basis of the case is this: the Constitution for the United States of America is the overarching requirements that all states must follow. When the states joined the Union, they gave up their sovereignty in order to subject themselves to the supremacy of the Constitution for the United States of America. And I think that we all understand that the Constitution is the supreme law. Therefore, the requirements that it sets forth are the agreed upon code of conduct that all the states must follow, particularly in the adjudication of crimes, because most of the Constitution applies to criminal matters. It applies to individual liberty. So there are specific procedures that must be followed. We understand that it needs to be trial by jury, right? We understand that you're innocent until proven guilty. We understand that you can't be arrested and warrants issued, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. These are things that we understand as the procedures that the Constitution dictates. The problem is that when I got into this litigation 9 years ago, there's one state, the state of Washington in particular, who's the primary respondent in our litigation, that doesn't follow the procedures. In fact, they are outright blatantly refusing to follow them. So the Constitution, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments. Amendment 5, which is certainly part of the Bill of Rights, it was adopted and ratified by the people on December 15th, 1791, in all intents and purposes. So it is legitimate, it is valid, and has never been changed. What it says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. That's clear. You got to have an indictment by grand jury before arresting someone or holding over for a capital or an infamous crime. Now, a capital crime is any crime that is punishable by death, and an infamous crime is defined as any crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment in a penitentiary. So if you can get more than 1 year, that would be an infamous crime. Any felony would be an infamous crime. However, state of Washington, Article 1, Section 26 of its inferior constitution says, no grand jury shall be drawn or summoned in any county. So now we have a state provision in its inferior constitution that functions directly to the contrary of the United States Constitution, which means that when they perform an arrest without having the proper documentation in place, that arrest is unconstitutional because it derives from an unconstitutional act. And so now we have a situation where the state of Washington has never convicted a person legally and lawfully consistent with the procedures and processes established and codified in the Constitution of the United States. And that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. That's quite interesting because so Washington state's constitution, they have their own state constitution. It directly conflicts with the United States Constitution. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, once I got into litigation, once we started it, then we came to find out that there's actually 13 states that do not conduct a grand jury.
Is Missouri one of them?
Yeah. Now, there's another 28 on top of that that have incorporated a provision in their constitutions that permit the prosecutor. It doesn't say that they won't conduct a grand jury, but what it says it permits the prosecutor to use their discretion to decide whether or not to charge by way of indictment. Now, you can never use discretion with regard to an obligation, a constitutional obligation, because that's the law. They promise to do it. They have to do it. And so when the states said, well, you can pick and choose who gets it and who doesn't, that is an equal protection issue protected under the 14th Amendment because, nobody can be permitted to be able to decide who gets a constitutional right and who does not. That would be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. So now we have 37 states that are acting in direct defiance of the Constitution of the United States. And that's a big deal because that means that there's more than 700,000 people currently in prison here in America today on judgments that are not valid. They're void, wholly without force or effect of the parties involved in dispute because of these breaches of constitutional obligation. And I'd love to tell you how we got to this point.
So are you fighting for this, more than 700,000 that are incarcerated? Are you working to get them out of jail or are you working to have legislature changed?
So we don't need to change legislation. What I'm actually asking for is to follow the laws that are already in place. So I'm not asking to change laws. I'm just simply saying, let's follow what's already there. So to answer your question, yes, I am, but there's a much bigger, broader reason for all this. And one is that if we have an agreed upon code of conduct, if we have a law, to what purpose is that law created? And what reason do we reduce it to writing if those that are bound to adhere to it are able to disregard it by their discretion? That doesn't make sense, right? Nor does it make sense for a state to be able to enact its own alternative legislation and then substitute it with the Constitution of the United States, because that would mean the state laws are supreme and not the Constitution of the United States of America. And that's not what the people believe either. So yes, I am fighting for these people, but I'm fighting for the much broader group of people because the purpose of the grand jury is to ensure that innocence doesn't suffer. It's a check on state power because it brings in a third party neutral decision maker to review the state's case. So before the state can arrest you, we need someone to review and make sure that the state isn't acting without lawful authority. It's the one thing that exists to protect the innocent from hasty or malicious charges against an overzealous prosecutor or malicious judge. And so today, if you were to open up the criminal procedure manual, it was written by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge, so a federal appellate judge. If you were to go to the preface, paragraph number 4, it says most prosecutors across the United States agree that as much as 15% of people in prison are innocent, but that's the acceptable deviance because our system isn't perfect. So we have a judge that says it's okay that we have an inordinate amount of people that are innocent suffering in prison today. And I don't think that's all right. It's not all right by me. Because we have
it's not all right by me either.
No.
You know what? I've actually done a lot of thinking about stuff like this. And I think the problem with stuff like this is while they will admit fault, they won't fix it. And here's so you said we have 37 states now that follow this basic, that do not follow this basic rule of
Right.
constitutional law.
Yes.
In my experience, here in the state of Missouri, they just killed a man uh,
Yeah.
with the so it's the they put him to death and he was locked up in prison. I don't remember what his name was or what his crime was. However, there was significant evidence that he was innocent,
Yeah.
or
Right.
or he may have not been the perpetrator that perpetrated the crime, and they put him to death anyway.
Yeah.
And that happens all over the country.
Yeah.
And states will admit fault, but they will not fix it. Are
Right.
you familiar with the West Memphis Three?
I am. Yes.
So those fellas got railroaded, and they had to plead out with an Alford plea.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, like, I'm sure that they may have had a grand jury indictment. I'm not sure, but so what you're saying is that if they did not have a grand jury indictment, that was unconstitutional anyway.
Well, so we got to open up to an even bigger issue, and that is that the purpose of the grand jury is to protect the innocent, right? It's a proceeding that's there for the accused and not the accuser. So what's happening is that in 99% of all grand juries, the accused doesn't have the right to be present to confront the hearsay evidence that's being placed against them, and that's actually a crime. Because obstruction of justice or a conspiracy to obstruct justice is when two or more people conspire for the purpose of preventing any party in any cause from participating in that cause commits that crime. Now that particular statute was written under the Title 42 of the Civil Rights Act, so that actually applies to prosecutors and judges. It's there to make sure that they give the rights and freedoms and liberties to the people that they're entitled to. And so when a prosecutor conspires by and between the accuser in order to prevent the accused to be present so that they could present the accused accusations and then deny the accused the right to be present to confront those, we have an equal protection issue. I mean, we have a crimes being committed, and we also have a person in a position of authority that's treating two people like circumstances differently. That prosecutor has no authority to be able to apply the law unequally. Now, when you consider the dynamics in that courtroom, that prosecutor is actually the attorney for the accuser. So what they're doing is they are hindering and obstructing free speech to control the narrative by preventing the opposing party from being able to present the counter argument. And that, once again, is a crime. And so, yes, there's a massive number of people that don't get an indictment outright, but we also got to address the fact that this person, the accused, was always meant to be present in that grand jury to confront the accusations against them. And we have a number of cases that actually go back to it. That changed sometime around 1890. But prior to that, prior to 1890, in 1888, we had a case called Hurtado versus California, where it actually describes the process of the grand jury. And it specifically states that the accused is present and has the right to counsel and the right to call and cross-examine witnesses. So we had a proceeding that included that individual, and now today we don't. What changed? Well, you have to understand that during the turn of the century, we had what was known as convict leasing. Convict leasing was when when the slaves were released from the South after the Civil War, and they ended up being rounded up under the 13th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment is the amendment that was adopted and ratified in order to abolish slavery. But I'm going to tell you, it did nothing of the sort. Not only does it permit slavery, but it codified the legality of it within our foundational law. Because what it states is it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for crime. Well, the moment you say except, it means that you can have slavery. But we're going to call it justice here in America. So we simply took something, retitled it something different, changed it from a private institution to a public institution, and told America it doesn't exist. But it does. And that's what's leading to mass incarceration today. And the 800% increase in the prison population. That's why we have 16 times more prisoners than closest industrialization. That's why we have 5% of the world's human population, but 26% of the world's prison population, is because these states realize they can make tens of billions of dollars off divorcing voluntary servitude of the weakest, most vulnerable in society. And that's, once again, not right. But what has happened is that during the turn of the century, we had the convict leasing. So the southern states in particular, what they were doing was they were going out and rounding up these previously set free slaves on arbitrary and capricious allegations that had no evidence of justification. And then they would bring them to a sham process where they would threaten and intimidate them until they said they were guilty. And then they would put them on train bound for the coal mines or some other industry that was affected by the absence of the slavery institution. They did that because they wanted to up their productivity. And so we just re-enslaved them under the auspice of justice. And so that's the reason why, the grand jury was removed from the whole process, was because if you're going to re-enslave all these people, the easiest way, or the only way you can do it without having someone else check in to make sure that you're doing it right, is that grand jury. Otherwise, the prosecutor and the judge can do anything they want. They can bring whatever charge they want and then reach whatever predetermined outcome that they want. That's why they say that you can indict a ham sandwich. You absolutely can, because you only get one half of the story being presented to that grand jury, and it's whatever they decide they want to present.
Yeah, I've actually heard that numerous times over the years about different cases, different places that you can indict a ham sandwich, and that's wild to me. So is Missouri one of the 37 states?
It is. It is. Yeah.
So I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was an issue over red light traffic cameras. Yeah. And the Missouri Supreme Court said that law enforcement could not issue tickets with red light cameras. And the reason why is because we couldn't face our accusers.
Right. It's no accuser.
And so there is precedence for it. And that's where I'm like, okay, right is right, wrong is wrong. Why is nobody doing anything about that? How far have you made it in your case?
So I've been all the way through the state courts. I've been all the way through the federal courts, and we're sitting in the United States Supreme Court right now under a jurisdictional error. Now, jurisdictional error is when a court exceeds the power authority statutorily conferred upon it by the Constitution. You see, the Constitution identifies the jurisdiction. It identifies which court would have jurisdiction, whether it's appellate jurisdiction or original, doesn't matter. The Constitution identifies the jurisdiction. So when a court, doesn't matter whether it's state or federal court, when a court acts outside of the authority that it has for jurisdiction, then it creates what's called a jurisdictional error. And that jurisdictional error is permanent, right? There's no time limit to be able to bring it in, because the court can't obtain jurisdiction when it lacks jurisdiction. And when they make the error, that doesn't, no period of time can make it become valid. So we have a jurisdictional error because the United States District Court stated within the order summarily dismissing this, which is what they normally do. They want to make these go away, especially big civil rights cases like this. They just don't want to hear them, because as long as they don't hear them, they don't have to address the issue. So, they employ what's called standing, which is a number of tactics that they use to try to prevent the case from being heard. They look at procedural defaults and so on. Anyway, so this procedural issue, this jurisdictional issue, the United States District Court, when we first filed this civil action complaint against the state of Washington, the judge ended up writing within the order summarily dismissing it that they lacked jurisdiction. Well, if you lack jurisdiction, then why did you just take action in case that you didn't have it? And so they created an error. I know what the jurisdictional error is, but what that means is that the only court that can address the jurisdictional error is the court that has jurisdiction, which in this particular case, it's the United States Supreme Court. So at a minimum,
one of those gotcha moments.
Exactly. So we found a procedural error that forces the court to hear it, but what they would most likely do is they're just going to simply address the jurisdictional error, agree that it's an error, and then reverse it, remand it back to the district court, so the district court can dismiss it legally and lawfully, and the Supreme Court won't have to hear the actual argument. That's what I'm concerned with. We have a couple of things that are in place to prevent that from happening, but I don't want to disclose them at the moment. But there are ways that we will actually be able to force the court to not dismiss it, because if they do, it's going to be a much bigger ramification than they would have if they just address the issue, give the people of the United States the rights that are guaranteed to them, stop lying to them. Because the truth is that no one has had the right to indictment by grand jury ever since 1833, when the United States Supreme Court came out in a case called Barron versus Baltimore and declared that the Bill of Rights are not a restriction against the state governments. They're only a restriction against the federal government. So in 1833, the highest court in the land directed all the courts within its purview, all the courts of the United States of America, that they don't have to follow the Constitution of the United States. And that's what's led to us today being without this grand jury indictment, because the states believe that they don't have to do what the Constitution demands because of a ruling that was put into place by the judicial branch saying that they are amending the Constitution in an other than lawful manner. Remember, the judicial branch has no authority to amend the Constitution. And that's actually the heart of our issue. See, I want the Constitution back in its place because the judicial branch has no authority to be able to, amend it because they didn't have any legislative authority. We people, we decide our destiny because we delegated our power into our own hands, the legislative branch. We didn't give the judicial branch the authority to be able to make law. We didn't give the executive branch the authority to make law. And yet we find today a situation where the executive branch is writing policy, going out and enforcing it, which was a ruling that came out on June 28th called Chevron. But nonetheless, we have that. And then we also have judges who believe that they can make a judge-made ruling and erroneously call it law, even though you can't legislate from the bench. So we've got the judicial branch that has chosen to create rulings that amend the law, placing that down to foundation and then directing all the states to follow judge-made rulings as opposed to what they're obligated to follow, which is the Constitution of the United States and the positive law. So we need to address what judges have put into place and what executive officers put in place, and get back into place the correct laws, so we can all live a life that would be predictable and consistent with what we believe.
So are you bringing the case against all 37 states simultaneously through federal court?
So I'm only bringing against the state of Washington. I only have to
Okay.
beat Washington. But we have enjoined all the other states. So, like in the case of Missouri, I was there. Jefferson City was the very first stop when I went and served all the attorney generals. I did that over the summer between May, middle May, and June 6th. I served those 37 states, and it started in Jefferson City, and it ended in New York, where I served on behalf of Donald J. Trump against the state of New York, because he was not present in the grand jury to confront the accusations against him. So, so we served on his behalf, and then after I finished the attorney generals and serving all the state attorney generals, then I went back and I started once again. I served all the state Supreme Courts, the same 37. And so we got all of them served between July and September 6th. And again, it started in Jefferson City and ending in New York. So we've joined all the states. See, the reason why I had to bring in the states was because if the state of Missouri is doing the same thing, I can't sue Missouri because that would be a violation of the 11th Amendment. But there are people that have been affected in the same way within the state of Missouri. So if I identify them, grab their affidavit, their truth, their complaint, and then go and serve it on the executive officer or the highest legal officer and the highest judicial officer by serving them a knowledge of these crimes are being committed by their agents when they fail to take action.
Like a class action.
Right. And now we've opened up the door to Missouri. So all I got to do is beat Washington. And when I do, then through the affidavits that I served on the state attorney general, state Supreme Court, through those people, we will then get relief in the state of Missouri for anybody that's affected in the same way, the same procedural situation.
Man, that's amazing, actually. I mean, this is all stuff that I've been waiting to happen for a number of years now. I've always questioned this stuff in my mind.
Yeah.
Why we do things the way we do. Like here in Missouri, man, our license plates are made by inmates.
I know.
And that's bullshit.
Yes.
It's the way I look at it is modern slavery to the point where I don't even care if the inmates are doing it as long as they're compensated properly.
Yeah.
Now, I understand there is a need for incarceration. There's a need for jails. There's a need for prisons. But as you said, did you say in just in Washington State, there's 700,000 locked up?
No. There's 700,000. There's 2.9 million people currently imprisoned here in America. There's 10
Holy
million.
Shit.
We incarcerate rate is 16 times more than the next closest industrialized nation. We have a massive number of
some of those incarcerations are really stupid. Incarceration. Some of those laws that have been broken are really stupid laws that we lock people up for, and then we indentured servitude, I guess is what you call it, because they say they compensate them fairly, but they have to charge them room and board. Whereas if I was to go to jail and I didn't do my job and I got out of jail, they would not charge me room and board. I wouldn't have to owe the prison system a bill. Right. And so in my mind, that's not fairly compensating them for room and board.
There is no fair compensation. Let's be clear on that.
Yeah,
because what they say is that it's actually gratuity is what they call it. that you're lucky to be getting anything is what is the argument that they have. It has nothing to do with fair pay.
Wow.
But you're absolutely right. You know, when we have the state of Florida, for instance, they have 140,000 prisoners in the state of Florida. 40,000 of them are serving life without parole. They'll never get out. They are forced to work, right? Forced into involuntary servitude. If they don't meet their quota, they'll be sent to the hole. They'll be put in segregation if they don't do what they're required to do. They don't get paid 1 cent. And you know what they're doing? They're building the chipset for General Dynamics fighter jets, right? They're sewing
You're
tags on
shitting
Victoria.
me.
No, they're sewing tags of Victoria's Secret underwear. They're answering the help desk phone for Northrop Grumman, a defense contractor. We have prisoners here in America that are making hamburgers for McDonald's, don't get paid a cent to do it. We have in California with the fires, we have those prisoners that are the primary firefighters for the Forest Service out there. They get paid $800 a month or something like that, or $8 a day, and then they're out fighting the fires against millionaires' homes, and then the way that we repay them is by sending them back to prison. And what's even sadder is that when these people get out of prison after being trained to build the chipset for General Dynamics, can they get that job?
No.
Absolutely not. They can't. Can they go get a job fighting fires? No, they cannot, because there's 90,000 limitations placed on these individuals that's going to keep them in a state of oppression. That's a calculated tactic in order to keep them in that state so that they can't get up. You see, there's a much better way to treat people. You don't take hurting people and put them into a hurtful situation, expect them to get better. That's not how it works. These people, the issue of morality, it has nothing to do with punishment. It has everything to do with public health. And we need to change our perspective on how we're going to treat these people, because just as you said, the top criminologists in the world say that only about 4% of our prison population is a danger to society. The other are not a danger, because we know that today 78% of the people in prison never hurt anyone but themselves. Drug-related offenses. We know that almost 90% didn't hurt anybody because of property crime. Property crime that's aberrant behavior. That's not dangerous behavior. And with aberrant behavior, you treat it much differently. You don't take a person and put them into a situation that's going to increase the trauma and increase the hurt. You actually give them the opposite.
And we don't focus on rehabilitation in our prison systems either. Like, it's not jail. Like, prison is so we do somewhat focus on rehabilitation in prison. There's nothing for jails at all. Like, I've not been to very many jails outside of the state of Missouri, but here in Missouri, we were locked down. And now keep in mind, this was over 20 years ago since I've been incarcerated in a county jail, but we were locked down for at least 16 hours a day in two men cells, two man cells. And it was heartbreaking. It was like I was a caged animal. And now I'll admit that the reason why I was there for assault. So I mean, I kind of deserved to be there, but at the same time, there was a lot of guys that I was locked up with, a guy that was in there for 6 months over child support.
Yeah.
And he was an old man. He was like almost 60, and his kids lived with him, and it was wild and mind bending to me how these guys have to fight for their freedom, and a lot of them can't afford it, man.
Yeah.
And that's what's the penal system, in my opinion, was built for legalized slavery, and there's no mental gymnastics that you can do to make that okay, in my opinion. And just like when all these big cases come up with the states, like the West Memphis Three, that off the top of my head is one big case that I can remember that I can latch onto. But there's all kinds of cases like that where the states will admit fault, but they won't fix it. They'll have an innocent man sitting in prison. It's on the news, it's on national news, but nobody cares enough to get those guys out.
Right.
As in my opinion, once oh fuck, we're wrong, like we got this guy sitting in here, and there's a possibility he didn't do anything, and he's not even tied to this crime. their first thought is how to cover their ass, not how to get that guy out of prison as fast as possible.
Right. It's because it's a business, and business needs to mitigate risk. And so once they identify that there's liability, then the best way to mitigate the risk is by abating it, and that's what they're doing. So, and you're right. I mean, across the board, everything you just said is absolutely valid. I have applicants in all these states. Now what we're doing now is we're going around, we're collecting 500,000 criminal affidavits on behalf of these people that are affected in the same way. Now we're just getting a massive number, and that's going to be the final blow to the Supreme Court. We're going to take those now that we've served all the states, and we're going to say to the Supreme Court, here, what do you want to do about these? These are crimes that are being committed by your agents under your watch, crimes that you're responsible for. And if you don't want to do anything about it, then great. We'll start converting these one at a time into criminal complaints, and we'll start holding trials for judges on crimes that are punishable by death. These are capital offenses. They're serious. And that court, it needs to decide, because every single one of these complaints, every single one of these affidavits are valid, per se crimes that all I have to do is show that they promised to do something constitutionally and they didn't do it. And they've already implicitly invited punishment in the form of perjury should they fail to fulfill such promise. The Supreme Court's going to have to make a decision. But every one of these states, I have the applicants there. And there's a number of states that I intentionally chose applicants that were innocent. Like Kensu up in Michigan. He's innocent. He's been locked up for 30 years, innocent. We've got Mr. Coleman down in Alabama. He's innocent, but they're refusing to acknowledge the innocence. And so, I've got a number of states where we identified people that were, just the story that we want to tell out of those states. Because why is this person still sitting there? Another example is why are people still in prison for marijuana charges? If this were about right and wrong, then what are they still doing there? Get them home to their families. If everybody else is able to do it, you wouldn't bring up some BS about ex post facto and, it was a crime. No, everybody's doing it. Get them out of that institution. Get them back home to their families. It's about money, and we have to acknowledge that, because the behavior of the system is not consistent with right and wrong, with morality. It's consistent with, this is the business, and that's exactly going back to what you said about what we created. When we had our founders and forefathers, when they created this nation, they created what was called an egalitarianism form of government, which is the belief that all men are equal. But in order for all men to be equal, government laws must treat them equally, right? If laws don't treat everybody equally, then that would be an illegitimate law under our particular constitution of government. And so when you have our founders and forefathers who said that they believed in something, they believed in all men being equal, but then when you actually take a look at what they did, what you find is that their actions are inconsistent with what they said they believed in. Because George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they didn't release what they called their property. And so as a result, they didn't create a criminal justice system, because it's not built on just principles of all men being equal. Instead, they created a criminal enslavement system, because slavery is and has always been the foundation of American jurisprudence. And we can see from a number of different things, such as the Fugitive Slave Act. The fugitive is a slave, the slave is a fugitive. Those two terms are synonymous. We can go to the 13th Amendment. Once again, the amendment that was supposed to abolish slavery. And what they say within that is that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for crime. So you can be a slave enforced in involuntary servitude if you're a criminal. Therefore, it made slave and criminal synonymous with one another. They mean the same thing. Now we know what it is that they're talking about. And so understanding what the foundation is, now we can understand what the motivation of the system is, because if it's a business, they're worried about money, right?
It's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same motivation for illegal immigration and allowing illegal immigration to happen. I, for me, even if we, so the government they don't need slavery anymore. There's 330 million of us here in the United States. And there's, I believe, now it's been a while since I checked up on this statistic, but I think there's somewhere around 9 million open jobs. And so we don't need slavery. We don't, and if someone were to say, like here in Missouri's case, our inmates make the license plates. If someone were to say, well, who's going to make the license plates? We can't get it done any cheaper than what the inmates do it. And I'm like, well, take away the fucking license plates. We don't need them,
You don't have them. It's voluntary system.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so that for me is a great argument for, what the slavery aspect of it, like why? What, we don't need it anymore. We have plenty of willing and able people who are out there looking for employment that can do these tasks. Mattress factories out in California, they make furniture in California. Those kind of things, we can pay our people a decent wage to do those things, and we can focus more on rehabilitation for the really, the bad criminals, the
Yeah.
the criminals that commit the rough crimes, the assaults,
Yeah.
um, the big the
Crimes
like
against people, right? Yeah, crimes
yes,
against people,
yes,
not property crimes or crimes against self, not crimes against
yes.
government, but yeah, yeah. And so we do have a proposal for how to move forward, and it has to do with, first off, changing from a punitive based system into a restorative based justice system. We have examples across the world of how a restorative based justice system works, because the reason why people hurt people is because they're hurting themselves. Hurting people hurt people. So, this person, what we're doing is we're being told to look at the monster, right? Look at what he's done. Look at that monster. We need to punish that monster for the things they've done. And what I want to say is we've got to stop looking at what people do. We've got to start looking at what's done to them. Because when we look at what they do, all we see is that monster. He needs to pay for things they've done. It creates that vengeance-based system we have in place today. But when we look at what was done to them long before that crime, as a child, as a husband, as a mother, then we see that something tragic happened to them that changed the trajectory of their life. It wasn't their fault. And now we want to help them. Now we want to heal them. And now we can go into a forgiveness-based system. Now we can heal the trauma of the child that nobody cared about healing back then, because that will eliminate the monster. The monster won't exist anymore. But we need to humanize these people. We need to recognize the fact that this person's hurting. Something happened to them, right? And we need to address that. And as a nation that professes, love and freedom, I think that's a much better route to take than taking people and villainizing them, making them into an object and telling them that for the rest of life, that's what they are. When in all reality, we can look at what happens to them, and we can find compassion and forgiveness and love, and that will solve this problem. That will eliminate the monsters. And like I said, we have examples. Sweden right now is getting ready to close its last prison because they chose a restorative-based justice system. Because we can heal people from the trauma that's been inflicted upon them if we care enough about that person to not want to put them into an institution that's going to profit off the involuntary servitude for the direct benefit of the state. You're right. The United States economy doesn't need slavery, but businesses do. When we talk about Victoria's Secret, we talk about McDonald's, we talk about Northrop Grumman, we talk about General Dynamics. These are corporations, for-profit corporations, that's profiting off of the forced involuntary servitude of these prisoners. They benefit from it. We are convict leasing once again, just like we did at the turn of the century. And then we say, oh, this is about morality. It's not about morality. It's about greed. It's about dishonor. It's about this government enslaving the people of the United States so that they can profit off their illegal acts. It's not about the labor, right? They get plenty of money from that, and that becomes discretionary spending for them. They don't even know where that money goes because there's no record of it. They get paid for it. But there's a much bigger issue, and that goes to this SQB. And I don't know if you're familiar with this SQB account. That's the Social Security account that we have. Anyway, as a person in the United States, I'm a shareholder of the value of America. I have my own
Okay.
share, and that share would be, within the Treasury. All the money that's in the Treasury is our money. It's not government's money; it's our money. And it's I have a portion of it, and so that would be basically this SQB. There's a lot more to it, but that would be my account for my value of America. And when you have that, right, then it's growing interest, it's increasing value. But when you put a person into a guardianship, which is basically what prison is, it's the state saying, oh, I'm going to take custody of you, and now I'm going to have a guardianship of you and take care of your health and welfare needs because you can't take care of yourself. So once they put someone into a guardianship, now the state has the ability to be able to have control over that account. And that's a much deeper conversation that we need to go. But I'm just saying that there's some very, very significant financial advantages to the state by being able to take custody of these people and then be able to rob from that account, particularly the interest. They can't touch the trust money, but they can touch the interest. And that's why they like to lock people up for life without parole, is because that's a person that will never, ever, ever be able to access that account ever again, to
Right.
buy a house or to buy a car, whatever that might be. And so these states, there's a lot of financial incentive to do it. And another one that I want to point out is that right now today, there are more than 12 million children that have been robbed from their families by the states through these CPS systems. Now these
Yeah.
CPS systems, they have an initial financial incentive to do that, because for every child that they remove from the love and care of their family, they actually get paid under the Title 4D Social Security Act. So the states are getting paid for every single child that they remove. So there's an
I
initial
didn't
financial
know
incentive.
that. I didn't know that.
It's a significant amount of money. Yes. If they adopt them out, they get even more. There is a financial incentive to do it. And I mean, it's upwards of $400,000 that the state makes for every single child that they remove.
Especially in, I mean, there's a huge incentive to do that, especially in impoverished
Yeah.
impoverished areas. You know,
Right.
that's wild. I did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yeah. So there's an initial financial incentive, but the one that people aren't talking about is the long-term financial incentive that people don't even see, because every child that you remove from the love and care of the family, where they don't get that love and that example of self and father and mother, every single child that you remove has got an 80% likelihood of going to prison over their lifetime. So now we have a system that is building a self-sustaining product because the trauma is being inflicted upon these children, by the removal of the love. There's a much better way to deal with the familial unit as well. Rather than taking a child, let's go ahead and help the parents get a job. Let's help them get housing. Let's not deal with an issue of scarcity where we're going to destroy a child's life and create trauma that he's never going to be able to address. So we can, long term, be able to have a product that's going to be feeding the system and long term incarceration. We don't want this anymore. These
Right.
children. I mean, remember, every single prisoner is someone's child. And I did this because of the family, because, again, going back to the beginning to kind of round all this out, when I realized that what I was doing before was wrong, I was in national security, and the systems that I was building, the technology that I put in place, the programs that I advocated for were hurting the people of the United States. And I felt that I had no choice, because I was not being a good example to my children. I have 3 kids. I haven't spoken to them in 9 years because I had to go down this path myself, because sometimes in order to help others, you got to suffer alongside them. So I made a decision 9 years ago that I was going to do this, regardless of whether I get paid, regardless of whether it's money. I'm going to do it because I have an obligation to do so. I joined the military at 17, and I swore that I would support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that's an oath that I intend to fulfill. But when I realized that I was not being a good example for my son, and I knew that my son was going to look to me as his hero, so I damn well better go out and do something heroic, right? And if I'm going to be proud of the man that he becomes, I must first be proud of the man that he emulates. So I needed to get out here and set the example for him and show him, this is what a man does, son. This is what they do. And for my daughters, I have twin daughters, and it's kind of the same thing for them, because they're going to be looking to me as an example for who they need to marry, right? And so if I'm going to be their first love, if I'm going to be their example of who they're going to choose to give their hearts to, then I better be the type of man that I would approve for them. And so this is an opportunity for me to be able to set the example and to be the man that I needed to be, and that I wasn't in their presence, and do it in their absence. And at the same time, God's going to bless me with the ability to help a lot of our brothers and sisters, be able to get their family back, because every single prisoner is someone's child, and those children
Hell
need to get
yeah.
back to their families to get healed from the trauma that's inflicted upon them by an institution that has acted unlawfully since it was incepted.
Hell yeah. And man, thank you for your service and your sacrifice, man. And
And an honor.
do you have you spent a lot of time in California?
I try to stay away from California. I do, but I haven't lately. Why is
So
that?
I love California. And the last time I was out in California, I was in San Francisco, and it was now keep in mind, I love California not for the politics, but because it is crazy beautiful out there and the weather is awesome,
Mm.
and there's lots of cool shit to look at. And so I love California not for the politics, but because California is California. The reason I ask is because when we were out in San Francisco, it was like during the height of COVID, and everything was locked down, but there were still smash and grabs. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, somebody in our party, now they were driving a rental car, and they had some of their belongings in their rental car, and it got smashed, and they were robbed. What do you say to the people like that are like, lock all these fuckers up? Let's. I don't think locking them up is the answer, but I don't think letting them run roughshod over the city is an answer either. What do you say to those people?
Yeah. You know, I'm not an abolitionist by any stretch. We have a system that if it works properly, I support it. because that's what the people chose to do. But it has to operate properly. And just like I said before, that if we have an agreed upon code of conduct that's established by the majority, we got to follow those rules. We got to follow those procedures. And if we don't, then the law is a double-edged sword. And if the government
Yeah.
breaks the law, then it is still unlawful. What government produces is unlawful because it derives from an unlawful act. So what I have to say to that is that the issue of criminality, the way we're trying to solve it from the bottom up, where we go out and arrest the people and hold them accountable for the crimes they commit, it's never going to work. It doesn't work that way. Because if our country is being led by criminals, and remember, a criminal is defined as simply one that transgresses the law. So if you transgress a law, you're a criminal. And I don't care if that law is the Constitution or a state statute. If you transgress the law, you are a criminal. So today, we don't have a single judge in this whole country that is not transgressing the law outright. We've notified them over the summer. I provided notice, making sure that they knew that they're all breaking the law. Notified their highest judicial officer in these states and asked them to please direct your agents to stop breaking the law, to abide by the Constitution. And they didn't take one single step to mitigate their criminality. They continued to do it and ignored those notices, all 37 states. So if our country is being led by criminals, then that means we're going to be led toward crime. And that will produce an environment of criminality, which will produce a society of criminals. We're simply following our leaders, right? So, before we can deal with criminality people, we got to start at the top. That's why my mantra for my organization is fighting crime from the top down. Because the way we deal with criminality is from the top. We must first ensure you have leaders that are in a leader country in a lawful direction out of love, faith, obedience, and law, and respect for the people and the laws they established. And until we do that, we're not going in the right direction. But if we can get leaders that are going to accept, the will of the people, that are going to obey the laws and the limitations of power that they have, then we can produce a good environment, which will produce a good citizenry. You see, the people of the United States, we don't want to be criminals, but we are following our leaders. And if our leaders are embezzling, then you can expect that the people will embezzle as well. If the leaders are committing sexual deviance, you can expect the people to be committing sexual deviance as well. We are a product of our environment. And if our leaders create environments of criminality, we will, in fact, become criminals. And once again, I think that this is a decision that the people of the United States need to make. It's not a decision that a state gets to make. It's certainly not a decision that a judge gets to make. It's a decision that the people get to make, because we're no longer going to follow criminals. We're going to choose to go in a lawful direction so that we can produce a lawful society. But as long as the government is acting outside of the law, and that's what I'm doing here, I'm drawing a line in the sand. And I'm saying, here's what the law states. This is what your obligations are, government. And you're clearly operating outside of those parameters. And as a result, you guys are on the criminal side. And if you want to remain criminals, continue doing what you're doing. But if you don't, then you must return to the established rule of law. You must work with me to fix this problem consistent with what the law demands, because we can't compromise on the law. The law is the law. Duralex, sed lex. The law may be hard, but it's the law. And we won't compromise on the law.
I love every bit of that, man. And that just it hammers the point home that we do have a system here in place to handle these things. However, because many people down the line have put their interpretation and forced it upon us, then that we have several different rules that are being broken. And why have them if the people that are instituting the rules are the ones breaking them? I love every bit of that, man. And there's no better way to explain it to folks who are victims of crimes than, the people that are committing the crimes aren't victimless themselves.
Right.
They are victims of the systems. We are products of our environment. And I've been saying that for many years about why I am the way I am, and how I got to be this way is because I'm a product of my environment. And it slowly over time, through talking to people like you and talking to many different people that I've had on the podcast, I'm opening up my view, because in my 20s, your view is like this. And then as you get older and you get more experience, that view opens up.
Right.
And you realize there's quite a bit of difference between what is fair and what is done. And a lot of shit that's done in this country is not fair. It's just done to pacify a very few people at the top.
Once again, if if we're being led by criminals, then we're going in the wrong direction, you know. And so right now, what the government's posturing for, what they're getting ready to argue is we can't do this. This is too big, right? If we do this, look at all these bad people that are going to be getting out. And I'm not advocating for the release of dangerous people, not at all. Don't get me wrong, right? But what I am saying is that if their convictions are unconstitutional, we must address that. We can't keep someone in a state of enslavement simply because, oh, you know, look at the crime that he committed. We don't even know if he's guilty because the state didn't follow the procedures. There's an inordinate amount of people that are sitting in prison innocent today, and we got to address that. You know, of the 1,500 people that our nation has put to death since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, of the 1,500 people, 139 of them have been proven to be innocent after they were murdered. 139. Of the remaining, another 186 were exonerated after being placed on death row. Between those two numbers alone, that's 18% of people that were on death row here in America were factually innocent. That's not a good number. That's not a good number for us to be at. Those are people that either were murdered by the system and then they claim absolute impunity, right? Or they're factually innocent because we have a process that's broken. And then we have a system that blames an institution that blames the system and the laws for what's happening. And what I got to say is, you know, before you blame the system for, you know, what's happening, I would first try to use it the way that it's designed to be used. Don't blame it for your incompetence, because that's all it is. If you're not going to follow the rules and the procedures that was designed to prevent innocence from suffering, then don't blame the system for the suffering and innocence. You know, and so these public officials, I want them to understand that they have a duty for the country. They've taken on a position, and they want to call themselves honorable. You know, they want to say that they're a leader. Well, leaders don't commit crimes. Leaders don't make decisions that are gonna be in the best financial interest for themselves and their pockets. They're gonna be making decisions that's gonna be in the best interest of the people and the needs of the people. They're gonna make decisions that are gonna be difficult at times, but they're gonna make it because it's the right thing to do, because that's what leaders do. These people aren't leaders right now. I haven't met a single leader, not one congressman, not one judge, not one prosecutor, not one of them has been willing to step up and actually recognize and enforce the body laws governing this nation. And that is,
and if you talk to them face to face, they're like, well, yes, but, and then you just hear a bunch of word salad fall out of their mouth. Let me ask you, are you working this case alone, or do you have some consensus help?
I'm by myself, bro. I got God. This is, I have people that help with spreading the information. So the case is done. We built all of it. We've done it. Like all we got to do now is make the government accept, you know, what's already been done. We've already taken it through all the courts. I mean, It's all finished. But ultimately, the decision will come from the Supreme Court. But the battle is fought in the opinion of the public. And that's where we're at right now, is that I've got to raise the awareness, because just like with Plessy versus Ferguson and segregation South, Dr. King, you know, he knew that segregation was wrong. He knew why segregation was wrong. But more importantly, he knew that if he could just get the country talking about that issue, that would be all that would be necessary to overcome that issue. And that's why I'm at, is that this is so clear cut, right? And so complete that we don't even get a response back from government. I mean, they don't even respond to any of these notices, because what are they going to say? You had an obligation, Constitution codified, you didn't do it. There's no justification for your unconstitutional acts. So what government's doing is they're trying to keep me silent, you know, and they do a very good job at that. But, you know, as I said in the beginning, that I chose to do this 9 years ago. I made the decision I was going to do it. And I decided I was going to do it regardless of whether there's money or not. And so for the last 9 years, I haven't been paid a cent. I don't work for anyone. I don't take on contracts. I operate on donation only, because most of these people don't have money to be able to pay. They can't get someone to come in and do this. And once again, you know, I wanted to make sure that I was the best example for my family that I could be. And that includes my country as well. And so it's a difficult thing to get people to come in and be able to do these things and commit to the same way I have, you know, for free. But that's what's necessary. And as long as I made that commitment, I really can't expect the people to come in and do the same thing. So I don't take on a whole lot of people to support because I don't have the ability to give them a place to stay and, food to
You're
eat.
right.
It's hard enough for me to be able to cover those expenses myself. Like right now, I'm supposed to be in San Antonio on Monday, and I've got $7 in my account. I don't know how I'm going to do it. God will pay way if it's meant to happen, but I don't have support. I'm on my own,
So
and
where
that.
can people find you if they want to help support your cause?
So I have all of the social media platforms. I have more than 600 videos on TikTok. You guys are welcome to go there. They're great, long, short videos, great wealth of information, lots of different topics covered. But I have TikTok, I have Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We have a Rumble channel up. We have an X channel up, and so I do a lot of discussions. Now I'm going into podcasts and radio interviews right now to try to ramp this up. Next week, I'm hoping to get into Telemundo down in Texas, which would get us on TV. The domestic news agencies are not willing to run this story. But we're hoping that maybe an adversarial news agency, Telemundo or Univision, might run the story because of the administration and what's going on at the border. So we're going to try to take advantage of some of these political issues to actually leverage, a local regional news station. But so we have all the social platforms, but then we also have a website. It's www.tanawah.com. That's my personal Tanawah, TANAWAH.com. And as I said before, the next step that what we're doing is we're collecting 500,000 criminal affidavits. Once I reach that number, I already told the court that I'm returning. I'm going to bring these back, and we're going to give them to them and say, what do you want to do about all these crimes that are being committed by your agents and you're on your watch and under your authority? Do you want to address this and let me have the opportunity to debate this, or do you want us to adjudicate 500,000 cases all at once or separately? Because you can either one agree to hear this and let me debate this, and if I win, I win. If I don't, I don't. But you'll let me debate this. Otherwise, we're going to convert 500,000 criminal affidavits into 500,000 habeas corpuses, and we're going to make sure that court doesn't get a goddamn thing done for the next 1,000 years.
Hell yes, man. I'm all for that. You kind of have to force their hand sometimes, right?
We do. We do. I mean, these justices, they don't want to make this decision. But you know what? We don't care what you want to do. Sometimes, leaders have to step up and do what they need to do. They need to do their job. And your job is to deal with issues such as this. And so if you're going to ignore this and pretend like this isn't happening, then we're just going to get a little bit louder. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm going around this country and I'm making sure that I get as many people notified of what's going on as possible, so that if something happens to me, we've got a whole force that's going to be behind me, that's going to be ready to step up and make this happen. This court knows that this is going to be heard now. They've already started posturing for it. The Chevron ruling that I mentioned that was on June 28th, that was actually in response to the things that we're doing, because that was their attempt to mitigate their culpability in this criminal conspiracy, the judicial branch, by saying to the executive branch that you don't get to do whatever you want, which is what the prosecutors have been doing, because the prosecutors are the ones that decide which charging instrument to use. They're the ones that are making the mistake. And so that ruling was actually, when you're involved in a criminal conspiracy as a public official, there's only two ways to get out of it. One is to notify the authorities of the crime, which if you are the authorities, that doesn't do any good. Or two, notify your co-conspirators of your intention to no longer participate, but that must be by some affirmative action. We must see that you did something to mitigate your culpability. And that's what Chevron was about. It was the Supreme Court placing the blame, or attempting to place the blame onto them by saying, oh no, you don't get to write policy because of ambiguity in the law. You don't get to write policy and go out and enforce it. You don't get to say, oh, I don't know if I need to have an indictment by a grand jury, therefore I can write policy that permits my agents to not do it. And so that was what that was about. It was posturing at the highest level. And we kind of needed that to happen anyway, because now we've got two branches of government that's pitted against each other, between the judicial and the executive branch. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but I don't have to worry about that, because that's them. When government says to me, because this is the response that I get consistently, is that, oh, that's a big deal. In fact, that's so big that we can't fix that. Like we can't do that. We can't fix this. And my response to that is that the people didn't do this. You're not going to continue to oppress people. You're not going to continue to lock them up because of what you guys did. No, government, you caused this. This was your fault. You're not going to continue to operate and then blame, this being too big to be able to fix. No, you're going to fix this, government. You're going to do that because you caused this. It was
And
your
like you were saying earlier, in Washington State, 700,000 inmates, you're not advocating to let them all out. That's the bottom line here is we just want the
Oh,
government to do what's right, what is written in law.
right.
And is there any room for interpretation? Are they saying anything about you're
No,
interpreting it wrong or?
no. So there is no interpretation on the constitutional obligations, right? There would be interpretation if there were ambiguity, but there's no ambiguity in no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
cut and clear. Yeah.
So if you arrest someone and hold them over for a capital or an infamous crime without an indictment by a grand jury, then you have just violated the Constitution. You see, the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is unique because they're called deprivation provisions. So what happens is that all of the Fifth Amendment's provisions, what they have is they have a deprivation of freedom, but they come with a prohibitory element. So, for instance, you can't be deprived property without just compensation. That doesn't say you have the right to have your property. It doesn't say that you have the right to compensation. It says that government can deprive you of your property, but the prohibitory element is you must be justly compensated for it. Therefore, without the prohibitory element, that gives rise to injunctive relief every time. The Fifth Amendment is very, very simple. You can't be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, and the prohibitory element is unless you have an indictment by a grand jury. Absent that, the deprivation is unconstitutional because you have failed to fulfill the prohibitory element. So the prohibitory element that justifies the state's deprivation is in fact the indictment. Absent that, it gives rise to injunctive relief, and we can seek a resolution remedy for this. And you're right. I'm not asking for these people to be released, but what I'm saying is that we have to address the unconstitutionality of these convictions. If they are unconstitutional, you got to address that. And we can address that in a number of different ways. First off, we just said that 78% of the people in prison didn't hurt anyone but themselves with drug-related offenses. These are people that are hurting. They're not dangerous. So let's get those people into an institution where it can heal them from that aberrant behavior. Let's get them into a place where we can train them to be happy, right? Where we can deal with the trauma that was created by an institution that had no authority to be able to do the things they did. And then we have property crime. Once again, property crime is aberrant behavior. It's not dangerous behavior. So as I said in the beginning, of the top criminologists in the world, every single one of them says that only about 4% of our prison population is a danger. Let's identify who those dangerous people are, and let's transfer them from a criminal incapacitation into a civil incapacitation. Let's treat them for the trauma that they've been inflicted, just like Sweden does, just like Norway does, just like these other nations that have a next to nothing recidivism rate, or just getting ready to shut down their final prison.
Let's be free. Let's
Yes,
be free.
exactly.
Like the Constitution wanted us to be.
Yeah.
I've got goosebumps, brother.
The issue of morality is not a matter of punishment. It's a matter of public health. I want to see us switch from a punitive justice system under the authority of the Attorney General into a health-based system under the authority of the Department of Health and Human Services. Let's get traumatic people with trauma that's been inflicted upon them. Let's get them into an institution that's going to heal them as opposed to hurt them.
I love that, man. I love every bit of that. This has been such a great conversation, Tanawah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is I love your passion for everything that you're doing. I love that, and you're not just doing it for you. You're not just doing it for me. You're doing it for your kids too. Let's not forget that. You're trying to build up a country that you can be proud of and leave your children something that they can be proud of.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a real honor. I've had a good teacher, and all glory to him, guys. All glory to him. Okay.
I'm going to link all your stuff in the description and everything. It's been a great time talking to you. Hey, before I let you go, man, I want to extend an invitation to my neck of the woods. If you're ever in the Kansas City area, look me up and we'll do this here in the studio, man.
I will.
See you guys next time.